Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books, out loud. This is a little blue book. It happens to be Little Blue Book number 523, and it is titled Life of Benjamin Franklin, written by John W. Gunn. And it has no copyright date, though I'm thinking it's probably 1920s, early 1920s. Somewhere in the 1920s. We'll just put it that way. Alright, this is part 2. And let me see, where did I leave off at? There it is. But argument is good as a training for the mind, if it does not become a settled practice. The two boys disputed long and earnestly about the topic suggested by their reading, and out of one of these disputes grew Franklin's first prose paper. The subject was the property of educating the female sex in learning and their abilities for study. Franklin took the woman's side, with the Collins lad opposed. As it is the usual fate of arguments, they parted without settling the point. But Benjamin, who thought that Collins sometimes bore me down more by his fluency than by the strength of his reasons, wrote out his views and sent his maiden thesis to Collins. Several papers were exchanged on the subject, when my father happened to find my paper and read them. Without entering into the discussion, he took occasion to talk to me about the manner of my writing. Observed that, though I had the advantage of my antagonist in correct spelling and pointing, which I owed to the printing house, I fell far short in elegance of expression, in method, and in perspicuity, of which he convinced me by several instances. I saw the justice of his remarks, and thence grew more attentive to the manner in writing, and determined to endeavor at improvement. This is another very intimate father and son scene. We can see the old gentleman as he accidentally discovers his son's manuscripts and looks over them with an expressionless face. And this time he does not ridicule, for he evidently regards prose as a more dignified and worthy medium than poetry, as well as one more suited to Benjamin's practical talents. Observe, as a fine point of discretion, that the father does not involve himself in argument with the son about the subject matter of the papers, but merely shows him the faults of his manner of writing. He is a good critic, a conscientious critic, citing chapter and verse, as it were, convincing the boy by several instances. While his father's advice was ripe, Benjamin changed upon the third volume of the Spectator, and here in Addison and Steele he had two master stylists, whom he could not err in studying. All style is intimate in its inception. Benjamin accordingly tried to master the mode of expression he found in the spectre. If the style is the man, so Franklin's method of acquiring his style is a reflection of the very practical character of the man. And as it is a plain, sensible method that any one can follow, it may be helpful to others with a desire for self-expression. I quote from the autobiography. I took some of the papers, and making short hints in the sentiment in each sentence, laid them by a few days, and then, without looking at the book, tried to complete the papers again by expressing each hinted sentiment at length, and as fully as it had been expressed before, in any suitable words that should come to hand. Then I compared my Spectator with the original, discovered some of my faults, and corrected them. But I found I wanted a stock of words, or a readiness in recollecting and using them, which I thought I should have acquired before that time, if I had gone on making verses. Since the continual occasion for words of the same import, but of different length, to suit the measure, or of different sound for the rhyme, would have laid me under a constant necessity of searching for variety, and also have tended to fix that variety in my mind, and make me master of it. Therefore I took some of the tales and turned them into verse, and after a time, when I had pretty well forgotten the prose, turned them back again. I also sometimes jumbled my collections of hints into confusion, and after some weeks endeavored to reduce them into the best order, before I began to form the full sentences and complete the paper. This was to teach me method in the arrangement of thoughts, by comparing my work afterwards with the original. I discovered my faults and amended them, but I sometimes had the pleasure of fancying them. In certain particulars of small import, I have been lucky enough to improve the method or the language, and this encouraged me to think I might possibly in time come to be a tolerable English writer, of which I was extremely ambitious. My time for these exercises and for reading was at night, after work, or before it began in the morning, or on Sundays, when I contrived to be in the printing house alone, evading as much as I could the common attendance on public worship, which my father used to exact of me when I was under his care, and which indeed I still thought a duty, though I could not, as it seemed to me, afford time to practice it. In that last sentence there speaks the expedient philosophic soul of Franklin. He would not permit an abstract idea of duty to interfere with his concrete need of self-education. Men are too much enslaved by words, and the word duty is one of the worst of these tyrants. If men always stopped to think whether they would be of greater service to themselves and consequently to others, by following duty or inclination, how often would inclination win? The idea that inclination tends inherently toward wrong courses is theological doctrine, but not good philosophy. The fact is that duty is often merely what others wish you to do, while inclination is what you would wish to do. This habit of Sunday study became a set rule with Franklin, adhered to steadily in later years, though when in France he followed the custom of the country by devoting the day to social recreation, attending the play or an opera, playing chess, which he loved to play by the hour, making merry with his friends, and, in short, comporting himself in a most puritanical and thoroughly civilized way. How strongly he preferred the old world manner of enjoying Sunday in the New England atmosphere of stern, oppressive piety is revealed in a letter to a friend in Connecticut. When I traveled in Flanders, I thought of your excessively strict observation of Sunday, and that a man could hardly travel on that day among you upon his lawful occasion without hazard of punishment, while where I was, everyone traveled if he pleased, or diverted himself in any other way, and in the afternoon both high and low went to the play or the opera, where there was plenty of singing, fiddling, and dancing. I looked around for God's judgments, but saw no sign of them. The cities were well built and full of inhabitants, the markets filled with plenty, the people well favored and well clothed, the fields well tilled, the cattle fat and strong, the fences, houses, and windows all in repair, and no old tenor, i.e. paper money, anywhere in the country, which would almost make one suppose that the deity is not so angry at that offense as a New England justice. Franklin was never a churchgoer. Not only did he have occupations for Sunday that were to him more important and interesting, but he disliked the dull sermonizing that was in that day carried to an almost unbelievable excess. He objected that the preachers confined themselves so narrowly to texts of theology, and almost never gave their hearers any sensible discourse upon the conduct of life. The strict theological biases of the preachers of that day could not be more forcibly illustrated than by Franklin's story of how once, in Philadelphia, he attended church for 5 Sundays successively, Had he been, in my opinion, a good preacher, said Franklin, I might have continued, notwithstanding the occasion I had for the Sunday's leisure in my course of study. But here was the drearily familiar polemic divinity of his father's library, and the fifth Sunday was the last straw. At length he took for his text that verse of the 4th chapter of Philippians. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, or of good report, if these be any virtue or any praise, think on these things. And I imagined in a sermon on such a text, we could not miss of having some morality, but he confined himself to 5 points only, as meant by the apostle, viz. 1. Keep holy the Sabbath day. 2. Being diligent in reading the Holy Scriptures. 3. Attending duly the public worship. 4. Partaking of the sacrament. 5. Paying a due respect to God's ministers. This might all be good things, but as they were not the kind of good things that I expected from that text, I despaired of every meeting with them from any other, was disgusted, and attended his preaching no more. Pardon me. Franklin, however, always belonged to a church, was first a Presbyterian and later on Episcopalian, and contributed to the upkeep of the church, giving money, indeed, towards the building of churches of different sects. While he stayed away from the church service himself, he had still an opinion of its propriety and of its utility when rightfully conducted. It is amusing to see him supporting the church and expressing a belief in its usefulness when, during his own life of more than 80 years, he found hardly any value in it. Franklin's religion was a simple deism. He believed in a God and in a future life, regarded all sects impartially, and opposed the emphasis of creed. His change from Presbyterian to Episcopalian could not have been due to any sectarian preference for the latter creed. He lost his religion, as many others have done, by reading religious books. I was scarce 15 when, after doubting my turn of several points as I found them disputed in the different books I read, I began to doubt of revelation itself. Some books against deism fell into my hands. They were said to be the substance of sermons preached by Boyle's lectures. It happened that they wrought an effect on me quite contrary to what was intended by them, for the arguments of the deists, which were quoted to be refuted, appeared to me much stronger than the refutations. In short, I soon became a thorough deist. He had a period of youthful pro-paganism, perverting, to use his term, some of his young friends, and he was in a way getting rather a bad name in Boston as a corrupter of youth. Fortunately for him, he left Boston while his reputation for mischief was still in the making. He did not long continue his zeal against orthodoxy, though a few years later, when working as a printer in London, he did write an iconoclastic pamphlet, a dissertation on liberty and necessity, pleasure and pain, and printed a limited edition for private circulation. But this he later set down as an erratum, E-R-R-A-T-U-M, erratum. Franklin early decided that, while he might hold his own views, he could not well change the views of the world. He subscribed outwardly to the institution of religion, as a matter of policy and perhaps because he thought it was good citizenship. But inwardly he cherished his own convictions, and in his own conduct was always very free and sensible. Chapter 3. Life of Benjamin Franklin. Franklin was the leading American printer of his day. He was proud of his trade, which he followed for many years, in which he never ceased to take a lively interest. The importance he assigned to his printing career is shown by the first sentence of his will. I, Benjamin Franklin, printer. Minister, plenipotentiary, plenipotentiary, from the United States of America to the Court of France, and now President of the State of Pennsylvania. During his diplomatic days in France, he took pleasure in printing as an avocation, having a private press in Passy, the suburb of Paris where he resided. With Franklin, printing was an art, and he had to the highest degree the pure joy of the craftsman in the skilled exercise of his craft. His scientific bent displayed itself in his trade. He invented several improved features for presses, was a pioneer in stereotyping, which he is credited with having introduced in France, and when working for Samuel Keimer in Philadelphia, he cast type with molds of his own making, turned his hand successfully to engraving, and made the ink used by the firm. When he left Keimer as the result of a quarrel, his services were soon required again, this printer having been given an order for paper money by the state of New Jersey, which he was not able to handle himself. This New Jersey job was obtained, Franklin tells us. I contrived a copper plate press for it, the first that had been seen in the country. I cut several ornaments and checks for the bills. All this goes to show that Franklin was first in his craft. Early in Franklin's printing career, he united with the career of journalist. In 1721, his brother James started the New England Courant. The paper was published every 2 weeks, and Benjamin was carrier, as well as printer and pressman. To this he soon added another function, and that of contributor. The conversations of ingenious men among his brother's friends, who amused themselves by writing little pieces for this paper, gave Benjamin a similar ambition. But suspecting that my brother would object to printing anything of mine in his paper if he knew it to be mine, I contrived to disguise my hand, and writing an anonymous paper, I put it in at night under the door of the printing house. The next morning the apprentice was afforded the most agreeable sensations, as his brother and the ingenious men aforementioned discussed the work of the unknown contributor in terms of highest praise, naming in their different guesses as to the author none but men of some character among us for learning and ingenuity. Other contributions followed until the boy had run out of anything to write, when he revealed his secret and took the credit due him, when I began to be considered a little more by my brother's acquaintances, and in a manner that did not quite please him, as he thought, probably with reason, that it tended to make me too vain. Probably with reason, because it tended to make me too vain. Okay, I read that completely wrong first time. Pardon me. Take a drink. A more important journalistic position came to the boy when James Franklin fell foul of church and state, was imprisoned for a month in punishment of a political article, and upon his discharge ordered to print his paper no more. While James was in jail, Benjamin had full charge of the paper, and he says, I made bold to give our rollers some rubs in it. When James was set at liberty, the friends of the paper met to devise means of circumventing the legislative ban upon the Courant. It was finally decided that the paper should be issued under the name of Benjamin Franklin, a technical obedience of the order with tongue-in-cheek. To make his shift have a better appearance, Benjamin's apprenticeship papers were revoked, but James saw to it that new papers were secretly made. For several months Benjamin continued as editor and publisher, while still an apprentice. But he had never got along well with his brother, and when a new disagreement arose between them, Benjamin took advantage of his brother to break with him, shrewdly reasoning that the secret apprenticeship papers would not be used against him. In his autobiography, Franklin confesses to the unfairness of this act, which was one of the first errata of my life. But he adds that his sense of resentment against his brother was stronger than his sense of fairness. James retaliated by getting his brother blacklisted in the printing shops of Boston, and Benjamin decided to go to New York. But being under age, he had to get away by stealth. His friend Collins arranged for his departure. He agreed with the captain of a New York shop for my passage under the notion of my being a young acquaintance of his that had got a naughty girl with child, whose friends would compel me to marry her, and therefore I could not appear to come away publicly. With money obtained from the sale of his books, Benjamin embarked upon his first adventure into the world. And I think we'll stop there. That is the end of part 2. And I'll see you in part 3. Thanks for listening.